Hey everyone, welcome to this tutorial on just an old-fashioned love song in the arrangement of Tommy Emmanuel. First, the usual stuff. The full lesson is split up into several parts and only the first part will be released on YouTube. For full access, you can check out my website or my Patreon page. Both offer different perks at different pricing points, so there should be something for everyone. If you want the tab and notation file, then do head over to the website, look up the song and click on the music notes icon. That way you'll get a 20% discount. No account or login is necessary to do this. So today I'm finally tackling just an old-fashioned love song. And I use the word finally for two reasons. One, it is one of the most requested songs on my channel I haven't done a lesson on. And two, it's one of my favorites too. It's one of the first songs I transcribed from Tommy's Live at St. Louis DVD, probably more than 15 years ago. So why did I wait so long to make this lesson? Well, in all honesty, I have already done an attempt and I ended up dropping the project. Not because this song is too difficult to play. That's the good news. It isn't Tommy's most challenging arrangement. But all of the variations are very similar, and back then I found it extremely challenging to find a way to explain all of this without things getting very confusing almost right away. That's why I went for a slightly different approach for this lesson. In part 1 and 2, I'm starting you off with a basic version of the verse and the bridge. And once you can play those, you can play the whole song minus the variations and the single note fills. I focus on those in parts 3 and 4, and it's up to you to pick which fills you are going to add and which ones you are going to leave out. So you have quite a bit of work ahead of you. So let's get started. Okay, let's get things moving then. The guitar is in drop D tuning, so you drop down the low E string to a D. Now, throughout the whole lesson, I will always refer to that low E string as the low E string, despite the fact that it sounds like a D now, just to avoid confusion with the other open D string. I'm also using a thumb pick like Tommy is doing. It's perfectly possible to play the arrangement without a thumb pick as well, but you will have to sacrifice that snappy muted tone on the bass part, but that is for you to decide. That being said, we're going to dive straight into the intro. Just one chord and a bass line, but it sets you up perfectly for the first verse. Here we go, the intro. And straight into the first verse. One chord, one bass line, one little fill in there. That's all. We start by going over the chords, which in this case is just a D power chord. Open E string, open A string, open D string, index finger 2nd fret on the G string, middle finger 3rd fret on the B string. That's the only chord you need for the intro. Then we add the bass line. You leave out the chord in the beginning altogether. You just start low E string, which sounds like a D. Then you add the ring finger to the 4th fret. Then you switch over to the A string. And then you add the index finger to the 2nd fret, which means that it's going to have to do some jumping around here. So open E string, 4th fret, open A string, 2nd fret with the index finger. And that is the main bass line. Now, in some cases, Tommy just pulls off, and in some other cases, he will play a little fill there. We'll show that in just a second. So 1, 2, 3, 4, to an open A string again. And that is the bass part that you're going to play on loop. So the first bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And back to the low E string. Now, the click that you hear when I played through that part the first time is always on 2 and 4, on the 2nd beat and the 4th beat. I would always include that click all the way at the end. Get the fingerings right, get the picking hand stuff right, and then try to add in that click. Adding in that click requires you to play a guitar with a pretty low action, because all that happens for that click is you're just leaning in a little bit harder with the thumb pick, but there is no real force or physical strength involved here. If you have to hammer the thumb down to get that click, that percussive sound out of the guitar, that probably means that you are going to overplay while going through the song. This should be a really light movement. It should not require you to hammer down on the bass strings. You do that on the second beat, 1, 2, 3, and on the fourth beat, again, just digging in slightly harder with the thumb pick, angling the thumb pick forward so that when you pick, you sort of slap the strings against the fretboard up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just play around with it a little bit. It should be a relaxed movement. Now, Tommy drops that backbeat every now and then when he has a little bit more going on in the picking hand. That happens in the second bar already, because then we're going to add the chord on top. First part is just, again, the bass note, 1, and then in between that bass note and the fourth fret, you're going to play a short, sort of a really short chord stab. It sounds as if a horn section in a big band is just playing one of those really short accents. 1, 2. That's all that happens. And you pick with the index finger and middle finger, and you immediately let go of the chord again. 1, 2, 3. And on the third beat, you play the open A string, again together with the G string and B string, still holding down the chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the index finger has to move over from the G string to the A string just for the pull off. That is basically the whole intro minus that one little fill. So those first two bars, back to back, first without the click. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Those were already the next two bars, and the only thing that changes all the way at the end, in the fourth bar, you play the same thing, bass note, chord, bass note, A string and chord together, and then instead of pulling off from the second fret to the open A string, you hammer on from the open A string to the second fret, and you add an open D string as well. A small triplet on the fourth beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and back to the low E string, ready to start the next 4 bars. So just that fourth bar one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And on that fourth beat, quite often Tommy leaves out that click and just picks that open A string to really make that fill pop out of that section. So you don't need to include the click on that part, but if you really want to, it is possible. Those were the first 4 bars. I already played them one time without the click in there. Now I'm going to add the backbeat again. And as you move back to that low E string, Tommy mutes that open D string right away. And then he plays basically the same thing one more time, 2 more times, depending on which version you watch. So he goes back to the version that I transcribed live in St. Louis. He's back to the bass line, 1, 2, 3, back to the chords. And then the last 2 times he will just play the bass part. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is how he ends my favorite version, live in St. Louis. But watch any other version and you will see variations on this, but always with the same building blocks I just showed you. The bass line, the chord, and that one little fill in there. That was the whole intro. Let me play the whole section one more time with the magnet on the guitar, and I'm going to add the percussive click right away. Here we go, all the way through the intro. And straight into the first verse. Now, there was a lot of thinking about how I was going to approach the verse and each and every variation, because it does not really make sense to learn this song note for note, because Tommy uses the basic fingering of the verse and always adds the same 2 or 3 variations, but he mixes them up. In one version he will play the first variation straight away and will then go for option B in the second verse, and in another version he will switch those 2 around. So I'm going to basically use the same technique as in the intro. I'm going to go over the easiest version first. It does not sound as exciting as most of Tommy Emmanuel's versions, but starting from that very basic version, you will see that it is quite easy to sort of make up your own version and mix and match those different variations that we're going to learn. This is the easiest version of the first verse. Let's have a listen first. And straight into the next verse. This is the easiest version I could think of, and the reason is simple. I'm lining out each and every melody note with a bass note. After that, we're going to look at variations, and we're going to push each and every melody note before or after that bass note. And that is all Tommy is doing himself. You'll see it's not that bad. We start with the same chord, with that D power chord. We're going to do a bit of moving around this time. And then we are heading for an E dominant chord. Middle finger on the low E string. A string should be muted. D string open, index finger, first fret on the G string, and 2 open strings. E in dominant 7. Then from that point on, we're going to go for an F dominant chord, which means everything goes up 1 fret. Ring finger to the 3rd fret on the low E string, index finger to the 1st fret on the D string, and the middle finger to the 2nd fret on the G string. And in quite a few cases, we're going to even add a bar across the B string and high E string as well. This is F dominant 7. We're going to move that up to F sharp dominant 7 and ultimately end up on G dominant 7. So starting from E to F sharp to G. Then we move over to an A chord, A dominant, open A string, middle finger, 2nd fret on the D string, open G string, ring finger, 2nd fret on the B string, and an open E string on top. You're also going to use the index finger on the 1st fret, giving you a sharp 5 chord. Then moving over to just A dominant, nothing else. Then adding the pinky to the 3rd fret, giving you A dominant, sus4, and then we move back into the D chord. So those are all the chords. D to E dominant, which moves up chromatically to G dominant, then to A dominant in various forms, and back to D. That is the chord sequence for the whole verse and each and every verse. No variations on that front. We start again by just playing the low E string, adding the ring finger on the 4th fret, and then as we move over to the A string, we play the G string 2nd fret, holding down the index finger. 1, 2, 3, 4. As the index finger jumps to that 2nd fret on the A string, you play that together with an open B string on top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You put the whole chord back down and you pluck the low E string together with the 3rd fret on the B string. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Again, 2, 4th fret on the low E string. Then open A string, open G string, open high E string. And you add a little bar. Now, there are 2 options here, and I've seen several versions online, not by Tommy, but by other people. And I used to play this like this as well. I didn't use a bar, but I went for the middle finger on the A string, the ring finger on the G string, and the pinky on the high E string, all on the 2nd fret. Tommy uses a bar, but he splits the bar up. He will use a bar for the melody notes on the G string and the high E string, and he will use the middle finger for the 2nd fret on the A string, because that actually makes the move into the next chord a lot easier than just using a full bar, either with the middle finger or the index finger. So either you go for this, middle finger, ring finger, pinky, or you replace that top section with a small bar. But you do make sure that you use the middle finger on the 2nd fret on the A string. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is the last beat of the 2nd bar. 2nd fret, 2nd fret, 2nd fret. And now what happens is that middle finger just jumps over to the low E string for that E dominant chord. If you play it like this, then you're now in for a really big shift. If you use a bar, for instance, with the index finger, holding the middle finger ready to just switch over to the bass note does make things a lot easier. That is also possible with this fingering, moving like that to the E dominant chord. So make sure you use the middle finger for that last bass note. Quite often, Tommy hammers on with the index finger to that 1st fret on the G string, but he plays low E string, G string with a hammer on or not, and an open E string on top. 1, 2, he moves up the middle finger to the 4th fret and he stops pressing down on the index finger. So in quite a lot of versions, it looks as if he's just moving this chord shape up and down, but he's never pressing down on the index finger as soon as he moves up. So 1, 2, 3, 4. With the middle finger, 2nd fret, 4th fret, 6th fret, back to the 4th fret. 1, 2, 3, 4. And all that happens in between there is between the 2nd and the 3rd bass note, I'm playing an open B string. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are also verses where he plays this together with the bass note on the 6th fret. That made it sound just a little bit too boring for this first easy version. But that is all that happens on the E chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then as he heads back to the 2nd fret, he will often play an open G string and D string. And as he moves back to the bass note on the 2nd fret, he will hammer on to the 1st fret again. That will often be the move. Then over to that F chord, so you land on that E dominant chord on the 1st beat, 2nd beat, 3rd beat, 4th beat, moving up chromatically. Now this section is probably going to be the one with the most variations in the whole song, because in that chromatic move up, Tommy will variate between where he plays the bass notes and where he plays the chords. The easiest version, I think, is this. 1, 2, 3, 4, which is hammering on to the 1st beat. 1, 2, going to the bass note on the 3rd fret and then adding the chord on top. 1, 2, 3, 4. So first the hammer on, then bass note, short chord, another bass note up 1 fret, chord, and now as you move up 1 more fret, you'll have that chord ring out as you move to the G chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you end up with a full sounding G chord on the 4th beat, and then you add the pinky 6th fret for the melody note. That whole E section one more time. And that is where you end up right in front of the 1st beat of the next bar. That is going to be the next section all around the G dominant chord. First, those first 4 bars all the way through without any backbeats in there. right after that melody note in front of the beat, you play another bass note, and that is the first note of the fifth bar of the next section. One more time, maybe just a little bit more up to speed. See, and that move up, if you practice that slow, that can sound a little bit strange. If you play it a bit more up to tempo, it will all sort of connect, and that chromatic line up to the G chord makes perfect sense. Then we end up on the G chord itself. A little bit of gymnastics here going on with the left hand. That melody note is in front of the beat. 3, 4. All of those notes without lifting a single finger. Well, we are lifting a finger, we are lifting the bar on top. We're starting with the pinky 6th fret in front of the beat. 1. All the bass notes are going to be on the low E string now, 5th fret. 3, 4. And that E note is an open string, and that is a bit of left hand gymnastics. So you're lifting up the bar to get an open E string on top. Pinky 6th fret in front of the beat. 1, 2, you release the pinky, and now you pick the 3rd fret, held down with the bar here, so the bar goes across 3 strings, D string, G string, B string, and then you have to lift up the bar to get an open E string on top. This is not easy. I'll show you an alternative in a second, because we can make it very easy. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's all just in the chord. 6th fret on the B string to an open E string to the 3rd fret with the bar to the 4th fret with the middle finger here. 1, 2, 3, 4. What is the easy solution? You can just drop down the pinky to the 5th fret instead of playing that open E string. 1, 2, 3, 4. What are you losing? That overlapping effect. That is gone, and instead of that you get only the last 2 notes overlap. That is a choice you have to make, either the hardcore version or the easier version with the pinky moving down. But that does make it a lot easier. Then we move over to our A dominant chord with a raised 5th in there, and we're going to play that right in front of the beat. Now, instead of that last bass note, Tommy quite often just plays a muted strum. 1, 2, 3, 4. See, so just a muted strum across those strings. And that strum going down prepares the picking hand fingers for that really short A augmented chord. And all your picking is index finger 1st fret on the high E string and ring finger 2nd fret on the B string. And then you add the next bass note. The variation that I'm going to show you now on this part, on the A chord, Tommy seems to make a dedicated effort not to play a bass note. Most of it are muted strings, and most of it is on the 2nd fret on the D string. So you have that snappy chord in front of the beat, 1, and it's just basically a thud, a muted D string. You release the index finger, open E string, now together with the ring finger 2nd fret on the B string. You pick up with the fingers and you strum back down to get another sort of percussive effect in there. 3, 4. So bars, beats 3 and 4. Bass note on the D string. Then plucking open G string together with the pinky 3rd fret. Back to the D string, 2 open strings, and back to our D power chord. And you guessed it, straight back into the bass line as well. So that whole section on the A chord, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That is the full bar. maybe even a bit slower. This is, in terms of technique, the trickiest section so far. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And again, if you do it this slow, it sounds a little bit disconnected. Once you pick up the speed, it all clicks. It sounds a lot more logical. 3, 4. See, then it all clicks all of a sudden. And you also notice up to speed, those bass notes on the D string are basically just ghost notes. It's just clicking on the D string. It's not actually really that E note that you're holding down. Then as you move to that D power chord, it's again the exact same thing as in the intro, including the one fill we already learned in the intro as well. That was the whole verse, at least the easy version. Let me play the last 4 bars one more time, starting on the G dominant chord. 3, 4. And that is verse 1 in full. Let me play through the whole thing, the whole first 8 bars one more time. And you may have noticed I haven't added in the percussive click yet. You're just focusing on the fingerings. Now I'm going to play through the whole section one more time without any percussive click included. That is verse 1. Now the tricky part with this easier version is that I've outlined each and every melody note on the bass note, which makes it almost impossible to play a click on that same bass note. So you will see in Tommy's versions, whenever he plays a click on one of those backbeats on the 2nd and the 4th beat, this almost always happens on a part where he's not playing any melody notes or chord fills on top. So the ideal place would be 1, 2 on that 2nd bass note, but then on that 4th bass note is going to be very hard to produce that click because you're picking a melody note at the same time, and that is when you leave it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2nd bar exactly the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. When you're plucking that melody note on the 4th beat, you cannot add a click at the same time. See, and in this case, when I move up the E chord, because I'm not playing a bass note on the 2nd or the 4th beat, I can add the click each and every time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Again on the 2nd beat, perfectly possible to play a click chord, bass note going up, and then as you move up to the 5th fret, you can play another percussive click if you want. And in that G bar, every melody note is in between the bass notes. So in that case, it is possible to play a click each and every time on 2 and 4. And then on this part, that is where we're playing around with those ghost notes. There's no click whatsoever there. So all in all, it would sound like this if I add a click on each and every bass note that is free of any melody notes on top of that. This is how it sounds. And that is adding everything together. This is the easy version. Now, as I already stated, start without the percussive clicks. add them in when everything else is working. I'm going to play through the whole thing one more time with the magnet on the guitar so you can have a look at how that percussive click works together with everything else. And then we're going to call it a day for the first part of the tutorial. Here we go, one time with the magnet on the guitar. Here we go. And that is the first verse. Take all the time you need to get this down well, because throughout the whole song, you are never going to change the fingering you just learned. The only thing that might happen is you're going to have to put down a certain finger a little bit sooner than you're doing now, but that is basically all. You know all of the fingerings for the entire verse. In part 2 of the tutorial, I'll show you the first variations on that melody. They are not difficult at all, and then we'll dive into the bridge part as well. I'll see you there.